All right, coming in at number 5 from the SEC. Greenbow, Alabama. I've got Alabama at 5. I have got some serious questions about Alabama. One question I don't have about Alabama is overall talent level. Alabama's going to have the most talented roster in the country. Just like last year when they didn't win their division or make the playoffs. Just like the year before when they did win their division but still got beat by Georgia in the national title game. So just having the most talented roster clearly is not enough. They've got the most talented roster in football every single year. I've got some legitimate question marks about Alabama. Here they go. You're losing what we were told are the 2 best players in college football last year. You're losing them. Bryce Young at QB, Will Anderson at linebacker. They're gone. You're losing your leading rusher, Jahmyr Gibbs, who was also your 3rd leading wide receiver and the only player on your entire team that you could rely on to consistently catch the ball. Alabama, a team full of receivers that have feet for hands. I mean, they led the country in drop passes. They lose a ton. You've only got 10 starters back. You lose over half your team. Now, yet, like I said, most talented roster, no question. Okay, so we know how you recruit. We know you've got these 5 stars ready to fill in. We get all that. But you had that last year and the year before, and it just hadn't worked out. Thank God for COVID, or else Alabama would be on a serious drought. But congrats on your COVID title in a shortened 2020 season that didn't matter and no one paid attention to. But you lose Bryce Young, Will Anderson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Henry Toto. You lose both your safeties, Battle and Branch, 2 of your better players. And who's stepping in at quarterback? Well, it's either going to be Jalen Mildew, who was Bryce Young's backup this past season, got the start when Bryce Young couldn't play, came in and played when Bryce Young got hurt. He was the number 2 this year. He's absolutely terrible. He's not a quarterback. He's Anthony Richardson. That's what he is. He's an amazing athlete that can throw the ball 150 yards. Problem is, you don't know where the hell the ball is going to go. And yeah, he can run around, but the guy can't complete a pass. He can't stand in the pocket and complete a pass. He's absolutely horrible. You got Jalen Mildew. Well, the fans know he's terrible. Now, if he ends up being the starter, they're going to pretend they love him and that he's great. But if you ask them right now, they know he's terrible. In fact, the fans hate Jalen Mildew so bad, they don't even think he's starting. They think Ty Simpson is starting. Whoever the hell that is. Got so good he didn't even play last year. Ty Simpson's so good he was behind Jalen Mildew on the depth chart. Ty Simpson. Bart Simpson's better than Ty Simpson. There are some legitimate questions and concerns about Alabama. Then you got the fact that they're losing both their coordinators, Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding. And we already talked about who they hired offensively. Tommy Rees, some reject, a Big Ten. This guy no good. This guy no good. He's like 24 years old, doesn't know what he's doing. Notre Dame had one of the most putrid offenses in the country. I don't know. A bunch of people said no to the OC job. Dan Mullen didn't want it. The guy from Washington didn't want it. There's a 45-year-old guy who lives next door to me that owns his own car washing business. Saban called him. He didn't want it. It's unbelievable. No one wanted the OC job. Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees is doo-doo in poverty. Good luck with that. DC, they haven't hired anybody yet. Well, the fans want Jeremy Pruitt. Wow. Unbelievable. What about Todd Grantham? Nope. Todd Grantham turned it down. Todd Grantham was offered the DC job. Why in the fuck would anybody want to hire Todd Grantham as defensive coordinator? How many defenses does this guy have to ruin around the SEC before people will wake up? I don't know. You offered him the job. He said no. Now the fans want Jeremy Pruitt. He's SEC. He's toxic. I don't even know if you're going to be allowed to hire him. But anyway, I don't know that it matters. You're losing so much. But anyway, Alabama, I got them coming in at number 5, 10 starters returning, whippity whoop. Number 4, now you want to know who I'm going to be way higher on than anybody else? Here it is right here. You want to point and laugh at Uncle Lou, or at the end of the season, a very good chance you'll be able to point and laugh at Uncle Lou. It's going to be for this right here. I've got Penn State at number 4. I am higher on Penn State right now than I have ever been in my time on YouTube. I would not at all be surprised to see Penn State win the Big Ten this year. I know about James Franklin, record in big games. I know how bad they get beat every year by Ohio State and Michigan. I'll say this. If Penn State can't beat Ohio State and Michigan this year, then I'll start agreeing with those of you who say James Franklin's never going to get it done again. He had just the one good year. I'll start agreeing with you. Things are lined up for James Franklin and Penn State to make a run this year. They've got the best running back duo in all of college football. They've got a defense that was much improved last year under new defensive coordinator Manny Diaz and should be even better this coming year with some NFL superstars on the defensive side of the ball. And they lose what I think was their weak link offensively, their quarterback, Sean Clifford. Now, he had a ton of experience, and you can't replicate that with Drew Allar, the quarterback that's going to take over. But from a talent perspective, Sean Clifford wasn't it. I was just never impressed with anything I saw from Sean Clifford. And a lot of Penn State fans I know agree with that sentiment. They're ready to usher in the Drew Allar era, and that's going to begin this season for Penn State. Now, they're going to have to prove it and get it done on the field, but if there was ever a reason to be excited about Penn State's chances to actually compete for a legitimate playoff spot towards the end of the year and potentially beat a Michigan and Ohio State and win the Big Ten, it's this season, I think, for Penn State. They got 13 starters back. Clifford's gone. I think that's addition by subtraction. I talked about Allen and Singleton, the running backs, Manny Diaz, a defensive coordinator. If Penn State's going to make a run, it seems to me like this is the year to do it. I've got Penn State at number 4. At number 3, family. The Corn Dog family. I've got LSU at number 3. I think there's a lot of reason to be excited if you're a Corn Dog fan right now. Jaden Daniels comes back. We'll see what happens with the quarterback. It's an interesting quarterback situation, so we'll keep an eye on it and see what happens. But Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, he struggled to throw the ball at times last year, but still, you're talking about a guy had over 4,000 total yards, right? Loaded with NFL talent on both sides of the ball, LSU is. I don't care what you think about LSU, even going back to Ed Orgeron's last couple of years when they didn't perform well on the field. It's never been a talent issue, and they've got a ton of talent. A ton of talent. They returned maybe the best linebacker in the country in that Perkins, is that his name? 15 starters back, 10 on offense. 10. Yeah, they lose Kayshon Boutte. He's going to be a good receiver in the NFL, but he wasn't even their best wide receiver last year. That was Neighbors. What I call him, Jim Neighbors. I don't know or care what his real first name is, but he's back. He had over 1,000 yards last year. They get Mason Smith back on defense. One of the best defensive tackles in the country, probably. Out last year with a torn ACL. He's back. They're going to be absolutely loaded. Absolutely loaded. Now, they got a tough test early in the season in a rematch game from last year against Florida State. Last year they played Florida State neutral site New Orleans. This year they play Florida State neutral site Orlando early in the season. Of course, they're going to have to then play the SEC West schedule, which is going to include games against Alabama, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Texas A&M, all that. But there's reasons to be excited. There's reasons to be excited if you're an LSU fan. I mentioned Jaden Daniels coming back at quarterback. All 5 of the offensive linemen return. Look, Brian Kelly's got a lot of haters. There's been points in time where I was among them. But it's not because he was a terrible coach. It was because he couldn't win playoff games and things like that. I'm not telling you LSU's making the playoffs. Again, this isn't a predictive ranking. I'm not telling you LSU will finish in the top 4. I'm telling you right now, based on how teams ended out the season, based on who's coming back, based on schedules, based on just things we know today, makes sense to me to have LSU ranked really, really high. Reason to be excited if you're a Corn Dog man. And no more real mystery here. I've got Michigan at 2 and Georgia at 1 to finish out my top 25. We'll start with Michigan. I'm still disappointed in Michigan's recruiting. Now, Michigan has always been a team that has recruited really well and then occasionally a great class, top 5. They've made the playoffs 2 years in a row. They've beat Ohio State 2 years in a row. They've won the Big Ten 2 years in a row. And they can't recruit to save their lives. It's unbelievable. You would have expected a huge jump in recruiting for Michigan over the last couple of years, and it hasn't happened. Now, that's concerning for down the road, right? But the talent that's stockpiled there now is pretty good. And Jim Harbaugh is coming back after once again flirting with the NFL. And who knows, probably still is flirting with the NFL. But as of today, he's scheduled to be the coach of Michigan for next season. They get 14 starters back, including, of course, quarterback J.J. McCarthy. Now, their wide receiver Bell is gone. Kind of like Notre Dame. There hasn't really been anything outside at Michigan that scared a whole lot of people. I know Michigan fans are going to talk about Bell, and they'll name this wide receiver and that wide receiver. Okay, you're a Michigan fan. We know you know everybody on the roster. I'm just telling you, there hasn't been a whole lot on the outside at Michigan that's worried people. Michigan has been a team that's had good lines of scrimmage, great defense, and great running games, really, and subpar quarterback play. Now, that's, changed a little last year with McCarthy, and, of course, hopefully, if you're a Michigan fan, he takes another step forward this year. But Blake Corum is coming back. He'll be the best running back in college football. I mentioned Penn State's running game. As far as a 1-2 punch goes, I would take the 2 at Penn State. But if I had to pick any one running back to win me a game, it's going to be Michigan's Blake Corum, who got hurt at the end of the year. Could have went pro, and I'm honestly surprised he didn't. Decided to come back one more year at Ann Arbor. Michigan's got some pieces to replace defensively, but they lost their best pieces defensively 2 years ago, too, and had no problem at all replacing it in 2022 when they made their second trip in a row to the playoffs. I've got Michigan at number 2. And, of course, I have Georgia at number 1. Now, we talked about teams that are quarterback-centric, right? Because Georgia's also a team that's replacing their quarterback, which, generally speaking, would give you pause or hesitation. A lot of people, myself included, and 99% of the people that watch this video, especially those that aren't Georgia fans, have spent the last 2 seasons telling me Stetson Bennett is absolute doo-doo and trash. He's gone. Whatever you think about Stetson Bennett, Georgia's quarterback situation should be good. There's 3 quarterbacks on the roster who are all more talented than Stetson Bennett. That does not mean they will play better than Stetson Bennett played, particularly this past season. That's not what that means. But it means that potentially Georgia will have better quarterback play without Stetson Bennett than they had with Stetson Bennett, right? If you're just looking at potential draft grades or rankings or recruiting rankings or whatever, all 3 quarterbacks, Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, and Gunnar Stockton, potentially better than Stetson Bennett. I am of the belief that while it's not a guarantee that all 3 of them are better than Stetson Bennett, it's almost a lock that at least one of them is. At least one of those 3 quarterbacks has to pan out. And if any of those 3 quarterbacks pans out, they will be better than Stetson Bennett. And Georgia's offense, especially when compared to an Ohio State, a Southern Cal, an Alabama, Georgia's offense is not nearly as quarterback-centric as those offenses are. It's just not. A lot of Georgia's offense is the quick passes, the screen game, the hitch passes, end arounds, jet sweeps, swing passes. A lot of Georgia's passing attack takes place 5 yards down the field and shorter, at the line of scrimmage, even behind the line of scrimmage. It's just not as QB-centric as some of these other offenses, and some of these other offenses are having to replace quarterbacks. Georgia gets a ton of starters back. 2 years ago when Georgia won their first natty, the big question going into last year was defense, because we lost basically our entire defense to the NFL. And that was true, and a legitimate concern. Well, that means that the defense you just watched at Georgia, extremely young, mostly freshmen and sophomores, mostly will be back. Lose Keely Ringo at cornerback, got to replace him. Lose an edge rusher, and lose Jalen Carter in the middle. But, all of our inside linebackers return. You got Malachi Starks returning at safety, Kamari Lassiter at one corner, Javon Bullard returns at the star position. You got Bear Alexander and the rest of those guys up front. Michael Williams, who was a true freshman last year and probably our best pass rusher, is back. Loaded. If there's anybody that's looking at Georgia and going, I don't know about their defense this year, you're an idiot. At this point, you don't have to know anything. Georgia defensively is like Lincoln Riley offensively. You don't have to know anything about Southern Cal's roster. You don't have to know who's coming back or who's leaving. You just know they're going to have a top 10 offense. Don't you just know Georgia's going to have a top 10 defense? Does it really matter anymore who they lose? If you don't know that, you're just blinded by hate or idiocy, one of the two. Their defense is going to be fine. They'll go on the offensive side of the ball. Lose a couple offensive linemen, but return 3, right? That's great news, including Van Pran, the center, which is probably the best news of all. He's coming back. We lose A.D. Mitchell, and that hurts. That's a big deal. And you're not going to find me sugarcoating that. That hurts. He's our best wide receiver. Now, you look at the numbers, it doesn't bear that out because he was injured all of last year, but he was our most talented wide receiver. Losing him to the transfer portal hurts. On top of that, we bring in 2 guys from the transfer portal, one being Ra Smith. He's in some legal trouble. So he was would have been a great replacement for losing A.D. Mitchell. Now we don't know if we'll have Ra Smith. We also bring in Dominic Lovett from Missouri, but he's not the same type of receiver that A.D. Mitchell and Ra Smith is. He's more of a slot guy, whereas A.D. Mitchell and Ra Smith are outside receivers, your wide receiver 1 types. So I do have a question mark about Georgia's wide receiver 1 position and who ends up playing out there. We'll see. But I don't have any questions about Brock Bowers at tight end or Oscar Delp at tight end or Ladd McConkey in the slot or Arian Smith catching 5 or 6 70-yard passes a season. I don't have any questions about that. Don't have any questions about the running backs either. Kendall Milton, back. Branson Robinson, true freshman last year, he's back. Andrew Paul, back from knee surgery. We bring in Roderick Robinson from in recruiting. Yeah, I mean, again, Georgia's defense, Georgia's running backs. These are two things you should have no questions about any offseason, even if you don't know anything at all about Georgia's roster or who left or who's coming back. There's never a situation where you should be questioning Georgia's defense or their running backs, so they'll be fine. Georgia, a consensus number one pick heading into the offseason in every single poll you look at, for good reason. And yes, I'm a Georgia fan. Most of you know that. This is the first time I've ever had Georgia ranked number one in a preseason poll. First time ever. I'm not. Look, if you're new here, you're going to say, "Well, this guy's a Georgia fan. I'm not listening to anything he's going to say." Nothing I can do to change your mind on that. But I'll tell you this: if you stick around, you will quickly realize that while I am a Georgia fan, I'm as unbiased a Georgia fan as you will find. I've never had Georgia number one heading into a season. Ever. I had Ohio State number one last year heading in. So, it's not just because Georgia won a national title, so now they're number one, and until they lose. No, I don't buy into that. Every season is different. But when you look at all the teams you could consider having at number one, Georgia, whoever the teams are on your list that maybe you would consider, but maybe that's Georgia, Michigan, LSU, Bama, Penn State, Ohio State, Southern Cal. I haven't seen anybody else ranked number one in any poll anywhere. I've seen Georgia rank one, I've seen Bama rank one, I've seen Ohio State rank one, I've seen Michigan. That might be it. Of all the teams you could consider having ranked number one, I don't think there's any with a bigger upside heading into the season than Georgia. I don't. They get a ton of pieces back. They've got the best coaching staff in the country. Their schedule sets up nicely. It's about the best way I can put it. I mean, I'm already being told 100 times a day that Georgia's got the easiest schedule in all of college football. Okay, well, if you believe that, then I assume you also think that means they're going 12-0. And if Georgia goes 12-0, they're going to be in the playoffs. Doesn't matter what happens in the SEC title game or who they play. Because Georgia's won back-to-back titles. If they go 12-0, they're going to the playoffs. You already know. Georgia, I think, should be number one in everyone's poll. They are number one in almost every single poll you look at, and I think it's for good reason. It's not because I'm a Georgia fan. And who knows? After I watch spring practice, if I'm not happy with what I see from the quarterbacks at Georgia and Ohio State's quarterback looks amazing, or Bama's whatever, maybe we'll move them around. That's why I do the different polls after these different events. This one's the signing day poll. Do another poll after spring practices and do a final poll in the offseason. So we'll move it around some, I'm sure, but I think right now it makes sense to have Georgia number one. There you go, the Uncle Lou Top 25, the first official Uncle Lou Top 25 of the 2023 offseason. Have a good morning.